All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ginger Leopoldo. I am the artistic director for Circa Pintig. Circa Pintig is a community arts organization based here in Chicago. We are celebrating our 29th anniversary, and we are very happy to be celebrating Filipino American History Month. Every year in October, our community celebrates our vibrant history, and this year's theme is about the history of Filipino American activism. So, how very fortunate we are today to have guest speakers who will speak to us on the topic of ethnic studies. But before we begin, I would like to introduce Tito Ruben Salazar with the Filipino American National Historical Society of Chicago. Hello, Tito Ruben.
Hello, kamusta, Ginger? It's about 1 minute before noon, so we'll officially start at noon, and we will record this so that other people can actually watch it at a later time. So, can you hit the record button now, Ginger?
Yep, the record button has been hit and we are now recording.
Good afternoon. Magandang tanghali sa inyong lahat. We're doing this at noontime so that more people can join during their lunchtime. That's why we call it lunchtime chat. This is the second of our last lunchtime chat in celebration of Filipino American History Month. So, as you all know, we're celebrating October as Filipino American History Month. And this year, the theme that we have selected is the history of Filipino American activism. And one of the uh, topics that we would like to feature is all about ethnic studies. So we are grateful and fortunate to have two of our guests who are from the academic community to tell us more about ethnic studies. So I'd like to thank our guest speakers for our panelists this week, Dr. Ana Guevara and Tracy Noriega from California. And thank you again, Ginger, for hosting and doing this live event.
Oh,
Maraming salamat.
thank you, Tita Ruben. It has been a pleasure and an honor. Last week, we had a chance to feature our special guest who spoke on the history behind the activism of the Workers' Bill of Rights. And if you have not yet had a chance to take a look at that lunchtime chat, we do have the links available for you. We will also be providing also a link, a digital resource for our talk here so that you can also follow along. We encourage you, if you're watching and tuning in live, to uh, go on ahead and post any questions you may have. And even if it's after our recording, we'll be sure to follow up on any of the posts. And we welcome your comments, feedback, and questions. So, without any further ado, I would love for us to welcome our two guest speakers. We are going to begin with Dr. Ana Guevara. She is the head of the GLASS program, the Global Asian Studies program at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Hello, Anna. How are you?
Hello, Ginger. I'm doing well. It's trying to find the sunshine, but I think I'm going to soak up the sunshine from Tito Ruben's backyard.
Yes, yeah. How wonderful that we can all meet virtually like this now, even though we probably are all zoomed out. But I'm here in Chicago. You are also in Chicago. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And then Tita Ruben is in Seattle. And good morning to Tracy, who is in the Bay Area. So, again, this has really been an interesting yet wonderful way to all come together. So, Anna, I'll go on ahead and share the screen so that we can take a look at what we'll be presenting.
Okay.
And can you see the screen okay? Does it have our lunchtime
Mhm.
chat?
Yes, it's
Okay,
visible. Yeah.
fantastic. So today is our lunchtime chat. This is all part, of course, of Circa Pintig's Raising Voices, Stories of Filipino Activism and Heroism. And we will begin by having you tell us a little bit about the work that you have done and help us to understand and learn about the history and the struggle of activism in regards to ethnic studies.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ginger. And also thank you to Circa Pintig for hosting this lunchtime chat, and also to the Filipino American National Historical Society for really engaging us in these very important topics. So magandang tanghali sa inyong lahat. And again, good afternoon. I'm also very honored to be here to talk about a movement that is actually very close to my heart. So I wanted to just kind of, preface that. I grew up in a family of migrant workers, which ultimately shaped my desire to understand this history. I grew up in a multiracial neighborhood in the San Fernando Valley in California, attended under-resourced high schools, and did my share of working a number of low-wage jobs, while I also watched my parents work back-breaking double shifts. So when I attended college, as many Filipinos can identify with, I majored in biology because I was supposed to pursue medicine. But my sanctuary was actually the Interdisciplinary Studies program, which included ethnic studies and women's studies. And I ended up double majoring in women's studies because Asian American studies did not yet exist at that time. And this was at the University of California at Irvine in the 1990s. And that is actually where I learned much of my ethnic studies within the women's studies program. And I found myself at various rallies, joining faculty and students who went on hunger strikes when there was a push to build Asian American studies at the University of California at Irvine in the 90s. And so fast forward a few years later, I ended up pursuing my PhD graduate study in sociology. So I moved away from medicine and I went to San Francisco. And while I was a graduate student, I had an opportunity, a very wonderful opportunity to teach in the Asian American Studies program at San Francisco State, a place that I came to know as the birthplace of the ethnic studies movement, and also the historic push for ethnic studies in college campuses. So I wanted to just highlight a couple of things, and if we can move to the next slide, Ginger. San Francisco State, as I hope many of you know, was engaged in a strike in 1968. And this was the very first campus uprising involving a powerful collective that operated under the name of the Third World Liberation Front, or TWLF, which was a coalition led by Black Student Union alongside Mexican, Filipinos, Chinese, Native American students who led a 5-month strike on campus. And what they were demanding was really a radical shift in admissions practices that excluded non-white students, and also a shift in the curriculum that they regarded to be irrelevant to the lives of students of color. So they were highlighting culturally relevant education, and specifically the formation of ethnic studies programs. They demanded power and accountability from educational institutions. They also promoted what they called the New World Consciousness, modeled on ideologies of self-determination and serving the people, and not just shallow and hollow conceptions of diversity and multiculturalism. And their vision really can be is best mirrored by one of the organizers of the Philippine American Collegiate Endeavor, or PACE, one of the campus organizations under the Third World Liberation Front, where this organizer says, "We seek simply to function as human beings, to control our lives. Initially following the myth of the American dream, we work to attend predominantly white colleges, but we have learned through direct analysis that it is impossible for our people, so-called minorities, to function as human beings in a racist society in which white always comes first. So we have decided to fuse ourselves with the masses of third world people, which are the majority of the world's people, to create through struggle a new humanity, a new humanism, a new world consciousness, and within the context collectively controlled and within the context, collectively control our own destinies. And so they were really asking for this, idea of having, access to their education and being able to learn about their histories. And so one of the primary gains of this particular movement was that it not only established the School of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State, with which came with various offerings of culturally relevant classes and the hiring of faculty, but more importantly, it also transformed the political consciousness of the student body. They reclaimed a heritage of struggle and a tradition of resistance that were enacted by earlier generations. It also, one of the gains of this particular strike is that it showed a powerful mobilization among the working class, with the strike occurring at a working class campus. And it also involved a coalition of third world students who were tied to their communities. So they included college students, but also the community, including the elderly, high school youth, and workers. So it was really kind of this cross mobilizing force. The students also tied their strike to a tradition of resistance, and they used strategies including mass mobilization and also direct action. They worked very hard in holding institutions accountable, whether in terms of having open admissions, community control of education, creating ethnic studies programs, all of which really, again, were motivated by the pursuit for self-determination. And one of the interesting aspects of this particular movement that I also want to highlight is that this strike drew inspiration from third world movements and revolutions occurring in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. And students really came to embrace their analysis that racial discrimination in the US was a product of colonialism and imperialism, such that people of color and the so-called third world faced a common oppression from Western nations. So their analysis were really sophisticated and really tried to get at not just racial identity politics, but also questions of oppression and power, of structural inequalities, and emphasize the importance of building solidarities and stitching various movements together. So just wanted to highlight context in terms of where I teach at UIC. So if I may have the next slide, Ginger. This legacy of student activism can be seen here at UIC, where University of Illinois, Chicago, where I teach. And I wanted to say that the Asian American Studies program at UIC is one product of that movement, but also that the Latin American and Latino Studies program that formed in 1974 was also a product of a student movement where students were demanding a curriculum that reflected the campus's neighboring Latino community. And similarly, kind of following that movement since 1991, or starting in 1991, a similar push from the Asian American student community also emerged, and with the push for a curriculum and student support services that responded to the current student demographic. And what I'm highlighting here is a timeline to show you of the various steps achieved along the way, to emphasize that each point in this timeline really required enormous amount of effort on the part of the students who pushed year after year to win these gains. And I actually didn't put the entire timeline, but if you go to the GLASS website, it chronicles every single step. I just wanted to highlight a few things for you. And one of those things is that my very own hire on campus in 2007 was a product of the 2006 Speak Out by students who were really demanding for additional faculty to teach Asian American Studies courses. 2010 was also huge for us because that is when we were able to establish the Asian American Studies program and offer a minor, and also was the year that we achieved the prestigious designation of as a minority serving institution, or ANAPISI, the Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institution Initiative that is funded by the Department of Education. And we have since been designated as a campus, as an MSI campus since 2010 because of this ANAPISI grant. And in 2016 also became a Hispanic serving institution. So it's one of those campuses that are duly designated as such. 2016 was also a big year because that is when the faculty, in response to seeing the transnational and globalizing forces that are shaping our lived experiences, decided to pursue the merger of Asian American studies and Asian studies. And that is, and 2016 was the year when we became GLASS. And that, again, one of the really important points on this timeline. And to date, what we're trying to do is continue to grow. And we remain the youngest interdisciplinary and ethnic studies program at UIC, and working very hard to stay afloat, especially in times of fiscal austerity. But one of the things that really keeps us going is this very strong legacy of student movement and involvement of students in every aspect of our program. And one of those things that I wanted to highlight is on this next slide, which is, and this is just an example of one of the events that's organized by the Global Asian Studies Student Advisory Board, who are comprised of undergraduate students that have been key partners in the program. And they do a lot of work for GLASS. And one of the things that they're doing as part of the Filipino American History Month is organize this teach-in event from a student's perspective. And what they're doing is linking the struggles in the Philippines to the formation of ethnic studies programs in the US, and also linking that to the abolition movement. And so it's really exciting to see this kind of activism being pursued or continued by our students. And that's something that we're really proud of at UIC. And then one last thing I wanted to highlight is on this next slide, just as a way to let you all know that one of the things that is currently in the works is a bill to teach Asian American history in high schools, and this is, or in K through 12, and this is the TEACH Act, the Teaching Equitable Asian American Community History Act, or SB 1268, that is in process. And this is being proposed by Senator Villavalam in Illinois to amend the Illinois School Code. And the key objective is to mandate the inclusion of Asian American history and that curriculum in every public school in Illinois. And this is a bill that is being spearheaded by the Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago and a number of other organizations who co-sponsored it. So just wanted to let you all know to keep an eye out for it and hope that you will support it, because the movement for ethnic studies is ongoing. And I think as you will hear from my colleague, Tracy Noriega, this is something that is happening at the national level. So I think I'll end there for now.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing with us and telling us about all that wonderful information. I would like to introduce now Tracy Noriega. She is calling in from, is it Union City, California?
Yes,
Yes, and you are currently the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services as well. And welcome. How is it there in the Bay Area now?
it is really nice. I know we were all talking about sun earlier, and the sun is definitely out. It's that quintessential California sunshine. So, we'll see how long this lasts here before we turn the tide into fall.
Great. Well, we're so happy that you're joining us as well. And again, just so that we can continue our conversation, I will have your slides ready to share also. And again, this will be a digital resource that people will be able to access, so you can review the information that both of our guest panelists have been speaking about or will be speaking about. And let's begin. Thanks so
All
much,
right.
Tracy. All right.
Well, thank you, Ginger, for having me here, and Tito Ruben. A quick shout out to Ate Victoria Santos, who connected me with all of you in order to be able to do this. And I am just completely honored and humbled that I could be with all of you, especially Dr. Guevara here. Ginger, can we go back one slide?
Yes, you could. Sure.
Thank you. So my name is Tracy Tagamolilla Noriega. I'm coming to you from occupied Ohlone land here in Union City, California. This is where I live, but I currently serve the students of San Lorenzo Unified School District as the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services. Yes, I'm a wife, a proud mother of 4, and I'm also the president of FAAC, which is the Filipino American Educators Association of California, and a member of FANHS East Bay. So, very similarly to what Dr. Guevara said, ethnic studies is near and dear to my heart. Many of us have said this, that ethnic studies, saved our lives, and I feel like it definitely saved mine. I knew that I wanted to be a teacher, and that was a result of having some pretty amazing experiences in school. As a second generation Filipino American, my grandparents as well moved from Philippines to Guam, in the late 60s, early 70s. And then we moved here to California, specifically Sacramento, California, in the mid 80s. But my experience there was, coming from a place where everyone looked like me, including my teachers, to a place where almost no one looked like me, right? Except the family that I live with and my aunt and uncle and my cousins. And so this whole notion of assimilation is something that I know very well. And even though I was very successful in school and of course, decided to become a teacher, I didn't really know what that meant until I walked into an Asian American Studies class at Sacramento State with Dr. Wayne Maeda. May he rest in peace, but I learned so much from him. And it wasn't until then, a junior in college, that I learned about my own history, my own Filipino American history. And I became angry, right? We go through these stages where you question and and I was angry at what I did not get to know growing up, younger, because I loved school. I loved history. I loved everything about school, but I can only imagine what it would have been like if I knew, if I read a Filipino author, which they already existed, right? If I had known about the Filipino farm labor movement, which had already happened, how much more meaningful that would have been. And I think about the journey in my own identity and the struggles that I went through to come to who I am. I definitely took that to heart, and is one of the reasons why my husband and I decided to raise our children in Union City, which is where he grew up, a very different upbringing than mine. And my children have had the opportunity to live in this amazing diversity and take ethnic studies classes at James Logan High School with amazing teachers who are also their aunties and uncles, right? Their mentors moving forward. And that definitely has continued my want and will in this movement. So I'm here today to kind of talk about where ethnic studies is in the K through 12 system here in California specifically. So if we can go ahead and advance to the next slide, Ginger, please. So what is ethnic studies? Dr. Guevara gave an amazing, history about, where it came from. And I think about those few points, right? Culturally relevant education. That is what, they wanted. They wanted this new world consciousness. And it was really all about self-determination. What is it that I can do, right? And yes, and about serving the people. So here is a definition from specifically the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University. And you can see here, just from this definition, it is where we learn the histories, the intellectual traditions, right, of our Native peoples and communities of color. It is our stories. And it is a way to eliminate racism and other forms of oppression. Next slide, please. This is a definition from the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum, and it is a team of amazing folks from across the state, up and down in various universities and schools, where we're getting together to write this model curriculum. And I'll get to the origin of that in just a little bit. But I highlighted here the fact that the field is interdisciplinary and that it encompasses these particular groups. right, that made up the Third World Liberation Front. African and Black African American Studies, American Indian, Alaska Native, Native American Studies, Asian American Pacific Islander Studies, Arab American Studies, and Chicanx Latinx Studies. Those are the core groups that were traditionally not in our history books growing up, right? We did not know about what the stories were that were coming from, you know, these particular communities. And it's going to be so important that we understand that. And there's also, you know, this idea of ethnic studies pedagogy, like what actually happens in a classroom to create community, to build that, you know, to work on identity and self-determination. So ethnic studies is very, very complex. And, you know, I look up to Dr. Guevara and folks like Dr. Robin Rodriguez at UC Davis, Dr. Allison Tintianco Cubales at San Francisco State, and of course, you know, my friend, the late Dr. Don Mabalon as well. So many folks, so many Pinay's and Pinoys that have led this, you know, led the way in activism and therefore are supporting us in, you know, in K through 12 efforts. Next slide, please, Ginger. So just quickly, so that we can get into some conversations, you know, what's been happening. Ethnic studies has happened all over California since the strike in 1968 in various high schools across the state. Many have graduation requirements. Many have many have different classes. I mentioned James Logan High School in Union City, California, where they have had a full department since the early 90s, and currently has launched an Ethnic Studies Social Justice Academy that has 3 cohorts, you know, already in its first year. So there's amazing work that is happening across the state. But in 2016, the California History Social Science Framework included ethnic studies as a 9th grade elective. So there was some guidance there in terms of what ethnic studies could look like, at least at the high school level. That same year, Assembly Bill 2016 was presented that required a model curriculum and a high school graduation requirement. Again, this premise that, you know, we need to learn about the histories that haven't, you know, necessarily been presented right prior. Also that, you know, it becomes, as a graduation requirement, we are making a statement to say that it is absolutely necessary, right? We want all of our students to leave high school with particular knowledge in ethnic studies. So in 2019, a committee was convened by the California Department of Education to write a model curriculum. And again, across the state, amazing teachers and professors came together to write this. But the curriculum, unfortunately, received a lot of criticism, lots of different ways. You know, folks can, you know, Google the history behind that. But unfortunately, right, it didn't come to pass. And the revision process began. Go ahead and next slide, Ginger, please. So here we are in 2020, this, you know, interesting year that we are all in the middle of. The high school graduation requirement turned into AB 331, and it does pass the Senate and the House, but unfortunately is vetoed by Governor Newsom. And folks are in different places with that, because on the one hand, the model curriculum is not quite done. There is a lot of criticisms about it. A lot of folks say that it was not true to the intent of what ethnic studies is, as I talked about earlier with the definitions, right? On the other, you know, the opposition says that it should be more inclusive. And that term inclusive, right? Inclusivity is fairly broad, because if we get to the definition of ethnic studies and those core groups, right, then are we really staying true to what the intent is? So there's, you know, there's different thoughts across the board. Here we are, model curriculum draft 2. But what happened with that, and it is, you know, it is still kind of in process. Just recently, the Instructional Quality Commission, you know, reviewed it, and is reviewing it, and has taken into account the different thoughts that are out there. But the second draft now excludes the experiences of Pacific Islanders, continues to exclude Arab Americans and the Japanese American experience, right? So again, going back to what ethnic studies is, according to those definitions I shared. This is part of the struggle. At the university level, specifically at the California State University system, there was an ethnic studies graduation requirement that was passed. But the caveat to that was it was either ethnic studies or a social justice class. So here yet again, we are straying away from the definitions of, the definition of ethnic studies. So, to close off my short timeline, we have at least 15 districts across the state that have graduation requirements. More districts are offering ethnic studies classes. Here in San Lorenzo Unified, it is my first year here in this district. We implemented, a few classes at each of our high schools. And so folks are in different places, but I mentioned that the Liberated Ethnic Studies model curriculum, again, that many of us are, a team of us are working on, because we want to be able to stay true to the experiences and the work that our folks, our people that paved the way, our ancestors, everyone that worked so hard to get ethnic studies even in a conversation, right? And so that is soon to come. But as Dr. Guevara mentioned, we're in the struggle and it continues. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Well, we thank you both for joining us. This is our lunchtime chat, but it was more about a lunchtime presentation, which again, we just appreciate and value all of the wonderful things that you've shared. Again, we do have a digital resource that will be available for everyone to access. And we also did have one question I noticed in the chat box. And let's take a look to see if maybe we can respond to that before we sign off. It seems like we can have more conversations just like this. And do please make sure you stay in touch and let us know if there are other talks or events or projects that are coming up that we can tune into. So one of the questions that I see in the chat here is Sarah Lynn Pablo asks, Tracy, is this the same San Lorenzo that Ruby Ibarra mentions in her song? On her album, excuse me. Might you be familiar?
I will have to research that. I've listened to a few of Ruby Ibarra's songs, but that is a really good question. So I wish I could answer that definitely yes or no, but that I will have to research that. Thank you.
Yes, and we do encourage everyone again to send out or post your questions in the chat box. Dr. Guevara, Tracy, Tito Ruben, myself, we are all here to continue the conversation. I will go on ahead and sign us off now. Tito Ruben, any final words before we wrap up?
Yes, I think it's an awesome presentation. We do learn a lot about ethnic studies. And as Kuya Jerry has said, the struggle continues. So keep us posted, and the tape version of this talk will also be available on YouTube and on CAN TV, the Chicago Access Network, in about a week, so that other people can actually watch this. So again, maraming salamat to all our speakers, Dr. Ana Guevara, Tracy Noriega, and of course, our host, Ginger Leopoldo from Circa Pintig.
Thank you, everyone. Do look out for that digital resource. We've got an open mic coming up this Saturday featuring youth voices. We will continue to plug away even our conversation today. Next week's lunchtime chat will be a talk with frontline and essential workers. So please stay tuned. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.